The garlic was sizzling in the cast iron when I heard my wife planning to destroy me. I'd stepped into the garage for 30 seconds, maybe less, to grab another bottle of wine from the rack. Elena's entire family was coming for dinner, and her mother had that look that said she'd drink us dry before the appetizers hit the table. The garage door was cracked open, letting in the October chill, and that's when I heard the voices. Elena and her sister Diane huddled by the wine storage like conspirators. "You chose him?" Diane's voice carried that bitter edge she'd perfected since her own divorce 6 months ago. "I dated loser dads right out of high school. You'll be stuck with him forever unless you get divorced before your kids come along." Elena's laugh was cold as the autumn air. "Already working on it. My lawyer says I can take half his house with minimal alimony if we play this right." I didn't drop the bottle, didn't breathe differently, didn't make a sound. 7 years of marriage, 30 seconds of truth. "Richard thinks we can make a case for financial misuse," Elena continued. "Victor controls all the accounts, makes all the decisions about the house. Classic pattern." "And I can testify to that," Diane said eagerly. "All those times you called me crying about how he never consults you on anything." Funny thing about that, those crying calls usually happened after Elena had maxed out another credit card on her charity work, or decided we needed a $20,000 kitchen renovation without mentioning it to me first. I selected a nice Cabernet, something expensive enough to impress Elena's parents, but not so expensive they'd think I was showing off, and walked back into the kitchen. The garlic had turned golden brown, perfect timing. I added the mushrooms and watched them sizzle, my hands steady as a surgeon's. "There you are," Elena said, sweeping into the kitchen with Diane trailing behind. "We were wondering where you'd disappeared to." "Just grabbing wine for your parents," I said, not looking up from the pan. "Your mother mentioned she prefers reds." Elena smiled that perfect smile she'd been practicing since we met. The one that used to make my chest tight with something I'd mistaken for love. "You're so thoughtful, honey." Diane settled at the kitchen island, her divorce-bitter eyes scanning the granite countertops, the custom cabinets, the professional-grade appliances. Everything I'd built with my own hands, everything she and Elena thought they could take. "This kitchen is just gorgeous, Victor," Diane said. "You really outdid yourself with the renovation." "Thanks, I designed it myself." I stirred the mushrooms, adding a splash of wine to deglaze the pan. Took me 3 months to get the layout exactly right. "He's so particular about everything," Elena said to her sister, and I caught the edge in her voice, the foundation they were building for their case. "Sometimes I feel like I'm living in a museum instead of a home." I nodded thoughtfully. "I suppose when you build something from the ground up, you want to protect it." The mushrooms were perfect, caramelized but not burned. I added the cream sauce and let it reduce while I prepared the rest of dinner. Diane and Elena chattered about their mother's new boyfriend, their father's golf game, anything but what they'd really been discussing in the garage. But I was listening to everything now. Every inflection, every careful word choice. 7 years of marriage, and I was finally hearing my wife clearly. Elena's parents arrived at 6 sharp, because punctuality was a virtue they'd beaten into their daughter since childhood. Margaret Chen, Elena, had kept her maiden name, another red flag I'd ignored, swept into the house like she owned it. Her husband David trailing behind with the resigned expression of a man who'd learned to pick his battles decades ago. "Victor, darling," Margaret said, offering her cheek for the obligatory kiss. "Something smells absolutely divine." "Chicken marsala with homemade pasta," I said. "Elena mentioned it was your favorite." "How thoughtful." Margaret's smile was warmer than her daughter's, but just as calculated. "You really do take such good care of our Elena." David shook my hand with the firm grip of a man who'd built his fortune in commercial real estate. "House looks great, Victor. That crown molding in the dining room, is that new?" "Installed it last month," I said. Elena thought the room needed more character. Another lie, but a small one. Elena had never noticed the crown molding before or after installation. She'd been too busy planning charity galas that somehow never seemed to raise much money for anyone but the organizers. We settled into dinner and I played the perfect host. Poured wine, asked about Margaret's book club, listened to David's stories about difficult clients. Elena and Diane exchanged meaningful looks across the table, the kind sisters share when they think they're being subtle. "Victor," Margaret said over dessert, "Elena tells me you're thinking about expanding the business." I glanced at my wife. We'd never discussed expanding anything. Oh? The construction company, Elena said quickly. You mentioned maybe hiring more crew. I mentioned a lot of things. I kept my voice pleasant, conversational, but I'm pretty happy with the size we are now. Easier to maintain quality control. Quality control, Diane repeated. That's so like you, Victor. Always wanting to control everything. The words hung in the air like smoke. David shifted uncomfortably. Margaret's fork paused halfway to her mouth. Elena's cheeks flushed pink. I think attention to detail is important, I said mildly. Whether it's construction or marriage or family dinner, the little things matter. Of course they do, Margaret said, shooting a sharp look at Diane. Victor's built a lovely life for you, Elena. A lovely home. He certainly has, Elena agreed, but her voice was tight. After dinner, while Elena and her mother cleaned up, or rather, while Elena loaded the dishwasher and Margaret supervised, David and I retreated to my study with brandy and cigars. Diane had disappeared upstairs, probably calling her lawyer or her therapist or whoever was helping her plan her next move. Elena seems happy, David said, settling into one of the leather chairs I'd bought when we first moved in. Does she? He studied me over his brandy. You tell me. David Chen hadn't built a real estate empire by missing subtle cues. He was Elena's father, but he was also a businessman who understood the difference between what people said and what they meant. Marriage is complicated, I said finally. It is. He took a sip of brandy, especially when lawyers get involved. So he knew. Of course he knew. Margaret had probably been fielding Elena's phone calls for weeks, listening to carefully crafted complaints about her controlling husband and his unreasonable expectations. Richard Moss, David said quietly. You know him? I know of him. Richard Moss, Elena's lawyer, divorce specialist. The kind of attorney who advertised on bus benches and late-night television. Not exactly the kind of counsel I'd choose for complex asset division. No, David agreed, but he's aggressive. Sometimes that's what people think they want. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the women's voices from the kitchen. Elena's laugh was too bright, too forced. Margaret's responses were carefully neutral. Even from here, I could feel the tension. You built this house yourself, David said eventually, on every inch. Smart man builds his own foundation. He finished his brandy and stood. Margaret, we should be going. Early day tomorrow. The goodbyes were warm but strained. Margaret hugged me a little too long, like she was apologizing for something. David shook my hand and held my eyes for a moment longer than necessary. Take care of yourself, Victor, he said. After they left, Elena and Diane retreated to the living room with a bottle of wine. I cleaned up the kitchen, listening to their low voices through the doorway. Planning, scheming, building their case one careful conversation at a time. I finished loading the dishwasher and wiped down the counters, everything in its place. Everything clean and ordered and ready for whatever came next. Because something was definitely coming. The thing about being a construction contractor is that people assume you're all muscle and no brain. They see the work boots and the tool belt and figure you're just another blue-collar guy who got lucky. What they don't see is the inactive law license in my desk drawer, or the fact that I built this entire life with the same careful precision I used to frame a house. Elena never read the prenup. Oh, she signed it. Had her own lawyer review it, even some family friend who specialized in wills and estates, not matrimonial law. But she never actually read it herself, just trusted that it was standard boilerplate protection for both parties. It wasn't. The infidelity clause was straightforward enough. Cheating spouse forfeits claim to marital assets. But the conspiracy clause, that was my masterpiece. Any attempt to defraud or conspire against the other spouse, including but not limited to false allegations of misuse, financial manipulation, or perjury in legal proceedings, would result in immediate forfeiture of all claims to shared property. Elena's name wasn't on the house deed. The property was owned by VCH Holdings, LLC Victor Chen Holdings, though Elena had never bothered to ask what the initials stood for. She was listed as a resident, nothing more. 7 years of careful construction, and she'd never noticed the foundation. I spent the morning after the family dinner in my home office, reviewing documents. Bank statements, credit card records, phone logs. Elena had been busy these past few months. Lunches with Richard Moss, meetings with a private investigator, consultations with a forensic accountant. She was building a case, all right. The problem was, she was building it on sand. The nanny cam in the wine rack had been recording for 6 months. Elena didn't know about it. I'd installed it after she'd mentioned that bottles were going missing. Turned out our housekeeper's son had been helping himself to my collection. But I'd left the camera in place. Good thing, too. 6 months of Elena and Diane planning my destruction. 6 months of conversations about hidden assets and emotional misuse and how to maximize the settlement. 6 months of Elena entertaining her personal trainer in my living room while I was supposedly at work. Reed Morrison, 28 years old, all muscle and no brain. The kind of guy who thought discretion was a type of workout supplement. He'd been posting gym selfies with Elena's jewelry visible in the background for weeks. I made coffee and settled in to watch the greatest hits. Elena and Reed on my couch, discussing how much the house was worth. Elena and Diane in the kitchen practicing Elena's testimony about my controlling behavior. Elena on the phone with Richard Moss, laughing about how easy it would be to paint me as an abusive husband. He's so predictable, she told the camera without knowing it. Works late, comes home tired, barely talks to me. It'll be easy to make him look like an emotional misuser. The irony was breathtaking. Elena had spent 7 years complaining that I worked too much, that I was never home, that I didn't pay enough attention to her. Now she wanted to use my work ethic as evidence of misuse. I paused the recording and pulled up Elena's financial records. She'd been moving money all right, but not very carefully. Small transfers to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. Nothing huge, nothing that would trigger automatic reporting requirements. Just enough to hide a nest egg for her post-divorce life. The problem was, the account was in her name only, and she'd been funding it with money from our joint accounts, using a series of cash withdrawals and wire transfers that left a paper trail a blind auditor could follow. Elena was committing fraud, badly. I made another pot of coffee and got to work. The state bar complaint against Richard Moss practically wrote itself. 3 pages detailing his pattern of client trust account irregularities, his history of coaching clients to commit perjury, and his tendency to encourage fraudulent asset concealment. I included copies of Elena's recordings, the ones where Moss explicitly advised her to lie about our financial arrangements and hide money offshore. I filed it electronically at 10:47 a.m. The complaint against Elena took longer. Fraud, conspiracy, perjury, violation of fiduciary duty. I had recordings, bank records, witness statements from the private investigator she'd hired, who'd been very chatty once I explained that his client was planning to commit multiple felonies. I filed that one at 11:23 a.m. The complaint against Diane was almost an afterthought. Conspiracy, aiding and abetting fraud, witness tampering. Her own divorce proceedings would be very interested to know that she'd been coaching Elena to lie under oath while simultaneously planning to perjure herself as a witness. Filed at 11:31 a.m. By noon, I was done with the legal paperwork and ready for the fun part. Elena came home at 2, flushed and happy from her yoga class with Reed. She found me in the kitchen making lunch. "How was your morning, honey?" she asked, kissing my cheek like a loving wife. "Productive," I said. "Very productive." She grabbed a bottle of water from the refrigerator and leaned against the counter, studying me. "You seem different today." "Do I? Happier, maybe. More relaxed." I smiled. "I've been thinking about the future." "Oh?" Her voice was carefully casual. "What about it?" "Just wondering what it holds for us, What changes might be coming?" Elena's smile faltered slightly. "What kind of changes?" "Hard to say. Life has a way of surprising you." She left the kitchen without another word, and I heard her footsteps on the stairs. Probably going to call Richard Moss, or Diane, or Reed. Maybe all 3. It didn't matter. By tomorrow morning, they'd all have bigger problems than Elena's divorce plans. I finished making lunch, a simple sandwich, nothing fancy, and ate it standing at the kitchen window, looking out at the backyard I'd landscaped myself. The oak tree I'd planted the year we got married was finally tall enough to provide real shade. The garden beds were perfectly maintained, every plant in its designated space. 7 years of careful cultivation, 7 years of building something beautiful. Too bad Elena had never bothered to appreciate it. Elena's keys didn't work. I watched from the kitchen window as she stood on our front porch at 6:30 p.m., stabbing her key at the lock like it had personally offended her. She tried it 3 times, then stepped back and stared at the door like it might explain itself. Her BMW wasn't in the driveway where she'd left it that morning. The credit cards in her wallet had been canceled at 3 p.m. Her cell phone, the one on our family plan, had been disconnected at 4. Elena Chen was having a very bad day, and it was about to get worse. She rang the doorbell. I let her ring it twice more before I answered. "Victor?" She was trying to keep her voice steady, but I could hear the panic underneath. "My key isn't working." "I had the locks changed," I said pleasantly. "Security upgrade." "Security upgrade?" Her voice climbed half an octave. "Why didn't you tell me?" "It was a surprise." I stepped aside to let her in. "How was yoga?" Elena pushed past me, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor I'd installed myself. "Where's my car?" "Impounded." "Impounded?" Now she was definitely panicking. "What do you mean impounded?" "Well, technically repossessed. The loan was in default." "That's impossible. The payments are automatic." "Were automatic. From the account I closed this morning." Elena stared at me like I'd started speaking a foreign language. "You closed our account?" "My account," I corrected gently. "The joint account is still open, all $12 of it." She fumbled for her phone, then remembered it wasn't working. "Victor, what's going on? Why don't you sit down? You look pale." "I don't want to sit down. I want you to explain why you've lost your mind." I walked to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. Elena followed, her panic giving way to anger. "This is exactly the kind of controlling behavior I've been talking about," she said. "Cutting off my access to money, taking my car, changing the locks without telling me. This is financial misuse, Victor." "Is it?" I leaned against the counter, perfectly calm. "Or is it protecting my assets from someone who's been stealing from me?" Elena went very still. "What are you talking about?" "The Cayman Islands account. Very nice beach photos on their website, by the way. Did you know they have to report suspicious transactions to the U.S. Treasury now? Something about money laundering regulations?" The color drained from Elena's face. "Then there's the matter of your boyfriend," I continued. "Reed Morrison, personal trainer, aspiring Instagram influencer. Nice abs, terrible OPSEC. Did you know he posts location data with his photos? Very helpful for establishing timelines. Victor, and of course, there's your sister." Poor Diane. Did you know her ex-husband has been looking for evidence that she committed perjury in their divorce proceedings? Something about hiding assets and coaching witnesses. I was able to help him out with that. Elena sank into one of the kitchen chairs. "You've been spying on me." "I've been protecting myself. There's a difference." "This is insane. I can't just what? Defend myself against fraud? Protect my property from theft? Exercise my legal rights as defined in our prenuptial agreement?" Elena's mouth opened and closed like a fish. "What prenuptial agreement?" I walked to my office and returned with a folder. "The one you signed 7 years ago. The one your lawyer reviewed. The one that specifically states that any attempt to defraud or conspire against your spouse results in forfeiture of all claims to marital property." I slid the document across the table. Elena stared at it like it might bite her. "You might want to read page 4, I suggested. The conspiracy clause is really quite comprehensive." Elena flipped to page 4. I watched her face as she read. Watched the moment she realized exactly how thoroughly she'd been outmaneuvered. "This can't be legal," she whispered. "It's completely legal. Your lawyer should have explained it to you, but then again, family law wasn't really his specialty, was it?" Elena's phone buzzed, her personal phone, the one she paid for herself. She answered it with shaking hands. "Hello?" Her voice was barely audible. "What do you mean, arrested?" I couldn't hear the other side of the conversation, but I could guess. Richard Moss calling from a holding cell? Or maybe it was Diane explaining why she couldn't come over to help. Or Reed wondering why his gym membership had been canceled and his apartment lease terminated. "I have to go," Elena said into the phone. She hung up and stared at me. "Richard's been arrested? They're saying he embezzled from his client trust account." "That's terrible," I said sympathetically. "I hope it doesn't affect your case." "What Gus?" Elena's voice was hollow. "According to this document, I don't have a case." "No, you don't." She stood up slowly, like an old woman. "So, what happens now?" "Now you pack your things and find somewhere else to live. You have until Sunday. Sunday? That's 3 days. Plenty of time. I'm sure Diane would let you stay with her if she weren't busy dealing with her own legal problems. Elena stared at me for a long moment. I don't understand how you can be so cruel. Cruel? I considered that. Elena, you spent 6 months planning to destroy my life. You were going to take my house, my business, my reputation. You were going to lie under oath and accuse me of misuse. You stole money from our accounts and hid it offshore. You brought your boyfriend into my home and laughed about how easy it would be to manipulate me. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the garden I'd built. I'm not being cruel, I said quietly, and I'm being precise. Elena left without another word. I heard her footsteps on the stairs, heard drawers opening and closing, heard the sound of suitcases being dragged across the floor. I made dinner for one, a simple pasta with the leftover mushroom sauce from the night before. I ate it at the kitchen table, reading through the legal documents that would finalize Elena's exit from my life. She came downstairs at 9 with 2 suitcases and a box of personal items. I was washing dishes when she appeared in the kitchen doorway. Victor? I looked up from the sink. Yes? I loved you once. I dried my hands on the dish towel, considering her words. 7 years of marriage. 7 years of building a life together. 7 years of believing we were partners. Once isn't enough, I said finally. Elena nodded like she'd expected that answer. She picked up her bags and walked toward the front door. Elena? She turned back. Leave your house key on the table. She set the key down without a word and left. I finished the dishes and put them away. Everything in its place. Everything clean and ordered and exactly as it should be. Tomorrow I would start the paperwork to dissolve VCH Holdings and transfer the house to my name directly. I would change the security codes and update the insurance policies. I would remove Elena's name from every document, every account, every trace of our shared life. But tonight I would sit in my study with a glass of good whiskey and listen to the silence of my house. My house, built with my own hands, designed to my specifications, finally serving its true purpose. Protecting what mattered most. Sunday came with thunderclouds and the kind of October wind that strips leaves from trees and sends them skittering across the pavement like frightened animals. I was making coffee when the first car pulled into my driveway. Elena's BMW, apparently she'd managed to get it back somehow, followed by Diane's Honda, followed by a car I didn't recognize. Through the kitchen window, I watched them huddled together in the driveway, Elena gesturing wildly while Diane nodded, and the third person, a man in an expensive suit, took notes. Richard Moss, I presumed. Out on bail and ready for one last desperate play. I poured my coffee and waited. The doorbell rang at exactly 9 a.m. I opened it to find Elena, Diane, and Moss standing on my porch like the world's least effective intervention team. Victor, Elena said, her voice artificially bright. We need to talk. Do we? This is Richard Moss, she continued, gesturing to the man beside her. My attorney. We think there's been a misunderstanding about our situation. Richard Moss looked exactly like what he was. A bottom feeder in an expensive suit, the kind of lawyer who advertised on bus benches and took cases other attorneys wouldn't touch. He was sweating despite the cool weather, and his smile had the desperate edge of a man who knew he was drowning. Mr. Chen, Moss said, extending his hand, I think we can resolve this situation amicably. I didn't shake his hand. I wasn't aware there was a situation to resolve. The prenuptial agreement, Moss said. There are some irregularities in the language that might not hold up in court. We're prepared to offer a reasonable settlement. What kind of irregularities? Moss opened his briefcase and pulled out a folder. The conspiracy clause, for instance. It's overly broad, potentially unenforceable. A judge might find it unconscionable. I glanced at the papers he was holding. Those are interesting theories, Mr. Moss. Of course, you might have trouble arguing them from a prison cell. His smile faltered. I'm sure I don't know what you mean. Don't you? I pulled out my phone and opened the recording app. Elena, why don't you tell Mr. Moss about our conversation on Thursday? The one where you mentioned his advice about hiding assets offshore? Elena went pale. Victor, you can't. Actually, I can. Single-party consent state. Every conversation we've had in this house has been perfectly legal to record. Moss was sweating harder now. Mr. Chen, I think you're misunderstanding. Am I? I scrolled through my phone. Let me find the one where you told Elena to lie about our financial arrangements. Or maybe the one where you suggested she could claim emotional misuse without any evidence. Which would you prefer to hear first? Diane stepped forward. You're bluffing. Am I, Diane? I turned to her. How's your custody battle going, by the way? I heard James got some interesting new evidence about your character. Diane's ex-husband had been thrilled to receive the recordings of her coaching Elena to commit perjury. Apparently, judges took a dim view of witnesses who lied under oath, especially when there was video evidence. You fool, Diane whispered. Careful, I said mildly. That's the kind of emotional language that might not play well in court. A police car turned onto my street, moving slowly. Then another. Elena noticed them and grabbed Moss's arm. Richard? Maybe we should go. No, Moss said, but his voice was shaking. We can handle this. Mr. Chen, you're interfering with my client's legal rights. That's grounds for a maltreatment complaint. Is it? I smiled. Officer Martinez, perfect timing. The police car pulled into my driveway behind Elena's BMW. Detective Martinez got out, a woman I'd worked with on a few construction projects for the city. She nodded to me and approached the group on my porch. Mr. Chen, she said, we got your call about the trespassing situation. Trespassing? Elena's voice climbed an octave. This is my house. Actually, ma'am, it's not. Detective Martinez consulted her notes. According to the property records, this house is owned by VCH Holdings, LLC. You're not listed as an owner or authorized resident. But I'm his wife. Separated wife, I corrected, as of Thursday. Detective Martinez, these individuals have been asked to leave my property multiple times. They're now attempting to intimidate me with threats of false legal action. Moss stepped forward. Officer, I'm this woman's attorney. We're simply trying to resolve a domestic dispute. Are you Richard Moss? Detective Martinez asked. Moss nodded. Sir, you're under arrest for violation of your bail conditions. You're not supposed to be within 500 feet of any alleged sufferers or witnesses. Alleged sufferers, Moss sputtered. What are you talking about? The fraud investigation, sir. Chen is listed as a witness in your case. I watched Moss's face as the implications sank in. By coming to my house, he'd violated the terms of his bail. By threatening me with legal action, he'd attempted to intimidate a witness. By bringing Elena and Diane with him, he'd involved them in his criminal behavior. Detective Martinez cuffed Moss and read him his rights, while Elena and Diane stood frozen on my porch. A second police car arrived, and 2 more officers got out. Ma'am, Detective Martinez said to Elena, I'm going to need you to move your vehicle. You're blocking a crime scene. Crime scene? Elena looked around wildly. What crime scene? Your attorney just violated his bail conditions on your property, ma'am. We need to process the scene and take statements. Elena fumbled for her keys, her hands shaking. Diane was already backing toward her car, clearly wanting nothing to do with whatever was happening. Wait, Elena said. Victor, please, we can work this out. I looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in months. 7 years of marriage, and I was finally seeing her clearly. The desperation in her eyes wasn't love or regret. It was panic. The panic of someone who'd gambled everything and lost. Elena, I said quietly, you made your choice 6 months ago when you started planning to destroy me. You made it again when you hired Richard Moss. You made it every time you brought Reed into my house and every time you moved money to that offshore account. Every time you and Diane sat in my kitchen and laughed about how easy it would be to manipulate me. But I love you, she whispered. No, I said. You loved what I could give you. The house, the lifestyle, the security. You never loved me. Detective Martinez finished loading Moss into the police car and approached us. Mr. Chen, we'll need a statement about today's incident. Ma'am, she said to Elena, you're free to go, but I'd recommend you consult with a different attorney. This one's going to be busy for a while. Elena stared at me for a long moment, then turned and walked to her car. Diane was already gone, her Honda disappearing around the corner like she'd never been there at all. I watched Elena drive away, then turned to Detective Martinez. What do you need from me? Just a statement about what happened here today. And Mr. Chen? That was good work, exposing the fraud. Cases like this, where lawyers coach their clients to commit crimes, we don't see enough people willing to stand up and do the right thing. I nodded. Sometimes doing the right thing is the only choice you have. After the police left, I went back inside and poured another cup of coffee. The house was quiet, truly quiet for the first time in months. No Elena on the phone with her sister, no whispered conversations about legal strategies, no footsteps creaking overhead as she and Reed used my bedroom for their afternoon meetings. Just silence, and the sound of rain beginning to fall against the windows. I walked through the house, room by room, seeing it with fresh eyes. The crown molding in the dining room that Elena had never noticed. The custom built-ins in the study that she'd complained were too masculine. The kitchen island where she'd planned my destruction while I cooked dinner for her family. Every inch of it mine. Every board and nail and coat of paint applied by my own hands. I ended up in the study, settling into the leather chair where Elena's father had sat just 3 nights ago. Had it really been only 3 nights? It felt like a lifetime. The rain was falling harder now, drumming against the roof with the steady rhythm of a job well done. I opened the desk drawer and pulled out a folder. Divorce papers already prepared and ready for filing. Elena's signature wasn't required. The prenup had covered that contingency too. By next week, it would all be over. The marriage dissolved, the assets protected, the threats neutralized. Elena would be someone else's problem, and I would be free to build whatever came next. I raised my coffee cup in a toast to the empty room. To new beginnings, I said aloud. The thunder rolled overhead like applause.